My father was still breathing when Uncle Rotimi left the room. He came back 1 hour and 53 minutes later with red eyes and a story about grief overwhelming him in the corridor. We believed him. We were burying our father. We had no space left in our hearts for suspicion. It took us 4 months to find out where he had actually gone. And when we did, when we finally understood what he had done in those 113 minutes while his brother lay dying 20 meters away, there was a silence in my mother's sitting room I have never heard before or since. Not the silence of shock, the silence of people recalculating everything. Every phone call, every embrace at the graveside, every warm voice asking how we were coping. Going back through 4 months of kindness and finding something cold and deliberate underneath every single piece of it. Uncle Rotimi had not gone to find heir. He had gone to the land registry while his brother was still alive because he needed the signature to predate the death. There are men who build things and men who wait for things to be built. My father was the first kind, completely and without apology. He arrived in Ibadan in 1971 with a mathematics degree, 40 naira in his pocket, and a letter of introduction to a man who did not exist at the address on the envelope. He stood on that street in Agodi with his one bag and his useless letter and made a decision he never spoke about, but that you could see in everything he did afterward. He was not going back. He slept on his cousin's floor for 3 months, taught primary school children arithmetic for 200 naira a month, ate 1 proper meal a day and saved the rest. By 1985, he owned a block industry. By 1992, a construction company with 30 employees. By 2003, 3 commercial properties on Agodi Gate Road that he had designed himself on graph paper, supervised personally, and tiled with his own hands, because a man who has known nothing wants to feel every surface of what he has built. He was not easy to be close to, exacting, stubborn, past reason sometimes. He held everyone around him to a standard he had developed through years of solitary discipline and expected them to meet it without the same years of practice. But he was honest. That was the word at his funeral. Every person who stood at that microphone said it without coordinating. Honest. His handshake was a contract. He had never taken what was not his and never pretended to be something he was not. In 2021, when the kidney diagnosis came, he sat us down on a Sunday afternoon. Mama, myself, my sisters Folake and Yesterday, my brother Damilola, and told us plainly. The prognosis, the will, everything documented and with his lawyer, Mr. Gbadebo, on Mulete Road. The commercial properties, the family house in Bodija, 2 undeveloped plots in Oluyole he had held since 2008, the block industry Damilola managed, all of it assigned, nothing ambiguous. He looked at each of us when he finished. I am telling you this so that when the time comes, there is no confusion and no fighting. What I have built is not for one person, it is for this family. Then he asked for tea and told Folake to change the channel because the news was depressing him. That was Papa. Serious business delivered plainly, then immediately back to living. Uncle Rotimi was not at that meeting. He was the last surviving of Papa's brothers, and he occupied a careful space in Papa's life. Warm on the surface, watched underneath. Papa had helped him quietly over the years, forgiving loans, made introductions, never spoken about it. Rotimi had received everything and acknowledged nothing, and that arrangement had suited them both. But Rotimi had never built anything. He was 68 years old and had moved between cities and businesses his whole life, with always a reason why the latest plan had not worked. He dressed well, he spoke well. He could make you feel in a conversation like the most important person in the room. He had just never created anything that lasted long enough to matter. I had never heard Papa say a harsh word about his brother. Looking back, I think Papa had made his peace with who Rotimi was long before any of this. What Papa had not anticipated, what I found out later had been keeping him awake in his final months, was how early Rotimi would move. He had underestimated the timeline. Papa's final 3 days were the longest of my life. Ward C at University College Hospital, a corridor that smelt of disinfectant and the specific exhausted quiet of a place where people wait for things they cannot stop. By Wednesday, the doctors had stopped talking about management and started talking about comfort. We stopped taking shifts. Nobody left. Uncle Rotimi had arrived Monday morning within 4 hours of our call. Small overnight bag. He had embraced Mama at the ward door with the warmth of a man who had known her 40 years. He sat beside Papa and spoke to him in the old Ekiti dialects from their childhood. Words none of us knew. Private words from a world before any of us existed. And Papa had responded, his eyes opening, something moving across his face that looked like comfort. I was grateful. I thought, this is what family is for. The nurse came out at 11:47 Thursday morning and said we should all come in now. We filed in, arranged ourselves around the bed. Papa was in the bed with the oxygen mask and the drip and the monitor beeping its steady rhythm. His breathing had changed, slower, longer spaces between. Sometime around noon, I felt a light touch on my shoulder. I turned. Uncle Rotimi was moving past me toward the door. He caught my eye briefly, the gesture of a man who needs air. And I turned back to Papa and forgot about it entirely. My father needed my attention more than my uncle's movements did. Papa died at 2:14 p.m. Uncle Rotimi came back at 1:53 p.m., red-eyed, quiet. He told Folake grief had overwhelmed him in the corridor and he had needed to walk. She squeezed his arm and thanked him for being there. We thanked him for being there. We were a family in the first raw hour of loss and we had nothing left for suspicion. That was exactly the room he had counted on. Grief consumes everything for a while. For the first 6 weeks, we were inside it completely. The burial, the visitors, the 100 small administrative acts that tell the world a person is gone. Rotimi called every week, warm, attentive, always the right words. How is your mother eating? Grief is long. Family must stay close. I received those calls gratefully at first. Then around the 6th week, the questions started, casually placed between condolences. Had we spoken to Mr. Gbadekpo? Was there a timeline for the will reading? He suggested perhaps a formal reading was unnecessary. He could help the family reach a quiet arrangement without legal complication. He was the surviving elder. He understood what Papa would have wanted. I told him politely we would follow Papa's instructions. He called again. Same suggestion, different words. I told him again. Then came the Thursday evening call that changed everything. He was talking about the Oluyole plots, both of them, by name. Plot A and Plot B. He said Papa had made a private verbal agreement with him years ago. He did not want trouble, he just wanted it honored. I kept my voice even and said the right things and put the phone down. Then I stood in my kitchen with both hands pressed flat on the counter because Plot A and Plot B were designations I had only ever seen written on documents inside Papa's personal files. Documents that had never been discussed at any family gathering. How did Rotimi know those names? I called Damilola immediately. Has Uncle Rotimi mentioned the Oluyole plots to you? A pause. Last week, same story, verbal agreement. I told him I knew nothing about it. Silence on the line. Then Damilola said quietly, Kimi, where did he go that afternoon at the hospital? Not a question. The sound of a man arriving at something he does not want to finish. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the dark, running the timeline over and over. The nurse at 11:47 a.m., the light touch on my shoulder, the door, 113 minutes, red eyes, grief in the corridor. 40 minutes from UCH to the land registry, 40 minutes back, 33 minutes to do whatever he went there to do. I got up at 4 a.m. and sat at my kitchen table with the lights on and a cup of tea going cold in front of me. I was already certain, I just needed paper to prove it. Mr. Gbadekpo's office on Mulete Road smelt of old paper and air freshener. The photograph of him and Papa at a construction dinner in 2009 still hung behind his desk. He still caught himself speaking about Papa in the present tense and correcting himself quietly. I put everything on his table. The calls, the plot names, the verbal agreement story, the 113 minutes. He listened without interrupting. Then he opened his drawer and placed a folder between us. Your father came to see me in January, he said, 3 months before he died. He updated his will. He added a specific clause. Both Oluyole plots left jointly to your mother, passing to his children after her death. No portion to any sibling or extended family. He asked me to read that instruction back to him twice before he signed. He looked at me over his reading glasses. He told me why he was updating it. He had become aware that members of his extended family were making inquiries about his properties at the land registry. He did not name anyone. He simply said he wanted the record unambiguous and he wanted it done quickly. When did the inquiries begin? October of last year, 5 months before his death. October. Papa had come home from his first serious hospital episode in September, still weak, still adjusting to new medication. And in that same month, someone had been in an office in Ibadan, asking questions about what he owned. Mr. Gbadebo, I said carefully, if someone went to the land registry while a property owner was dying, what could they do? He folded his hands. With forged documents and a cooperative clerk, they could file a fraudulent transfer of title, a deed of gift, a false power of attorney. Against a family that does not know to look, it might succeed. Against a properly registered will, no. The will overrides any subsequent fraudulent instrument. He paused. Your father knew what he was doing in January, Kemi. He built a legal wall before the attack came. Whatever Rotimi filed that afternoon has nothing to stand on. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and my mind somewhere else entirely. Papa had known, had been lying in that hospital bed, barely able to sit up, and had been watching, noticing. And the moment he was strong enough, he had walked into Mr. Gbadebo's office and done what he always did. Made sure every measurement was correct, made sure every line was straight. Then he had gone home and said nothing to anyone because confronting Rotimi was not the point, making it impossible for Rotimi to succeed. That was the point. I called Damilola and told him to find us a land search agent. Mrs. Osage was small, precise, dark complexion, short natural hair, a leather portfolio she wrote in with a neat, deliberate hand. Damilola found her through a colleague who had won a land dispute in Delta State using her work. She named her fee and her timeline without negotiation and delivered before both. 11 days later, she called us together. Mama's sitting room, Saturday afternoon. The same 5 people who had stood in that hospital room, minus 1. Mrs. Osagi placed her documents on the center table and did not soften what she had found. On the afternoon of Papa's death, between 1:15 and 3:40 p.m., an instrument had been filed at the Oyo State Land Registry, a deed of gift, transferring both Oluyole plots, Plot A and Plot B, from Chief Adebayo Oluwafemi Koka to Mr. Rotimi Adewale Koka. My father's signature, 2 witness signatures, a registry stamp. Then she placed her finger on the timestamp, 1:47 p.m. Papa died at 2:14 p.m. 27 minutes, that was the gap between the timestamp and my father's last breath. Mama's hand went to her mouth. Folake moved to her side instantly. Yesterday walked to the window and stood there with her back to the room. Damilola sat completely still, hands flat on his knees, breathing with the careful deliberateness of a man holding something enormous under control. I looked at the timestamp and ran the mathematics I had already run 100 times. Rotimi left the room around noon, 40 minutes to the registry, filing at 1:47, 40 minutes back, returned at 1:53 with red eyes and a story about grief in the corridor. He had filed that document, driven back through Ibadan traffic, composed his face, and walked back into the room where his brother lay with 27 minutes left to live. He had stood at the foot of that bed, knowing what was now sitting in a file at the land registry, knowing that by the time we understood what had happened, the land would already be in his name. That was what he had believed. He had not known about January, about the Tuesday morning visit to Mr. Gbadebo, about the updated will with its specific clause and its separately listed instruction. He had not known that Papa, exacting, precise, stubborn Papa, had already seen him coming and built a wall he could not get through. Damilola looked up from his hands. How do we proceed? Mrs. Osage opened her portfolio to a fresh page. 3 more days. There are 2 other filings through the same clerk I want to document. If this man has done this to other families, I want that on record when we walk in. Damilola nodded. 3 days, he said. The criminal complaint was filed on a Tuesday morning. Forgery of a deceased person's signature, filing of fraudulent instrument at a government registry, conspiracy to commit property theft. The registry clerk was separately reported to the Ministry of Lands. Mrs. Osagi had found 2 more additional fraudulent filings through the same clerk with different families and submitted everything without being asked or paid extra. Uncle Rotimi arrived for questioning in a pressed agbada with a briefcase lawyer beside him, composed, cooperative, ready to clarify the misunderstanding. The investigating officer placed 3 items on the table: the deed of gift, the hospital record showing Papa's death time, 2:14 p.m., the registry timestamp, 1:47 p.m. Rotimi's composure drained from his face slowly and visibly. He looked at those 3 items for 45 seconds without speaking. His lawyer leaned over and whispered. Rotimi nodded. I would like to make a statement. Not remorse, not conscience. The statement of a man who has looked at mathematics that no longer works in his favor. He admitted filing the instrument. He said a contact handled the process. He said the verbal agreement was real. He said he was only protecting what was rightfully his. He did not say sorry. He did not say Papa's name once. The hearing was a Tuesday morning in February. Harmattan still in the air, that dry Ibadan cold that sits in the morning and burns away by noon. We arrived together. Mama in her best black lace, small and upright and steady. Folake and Yeside on either side of her. Damilola in a borrowed-looking dark suit, myself behind. The courtroom was full. Old neighbors, men who had worked for Papa in the block industry, friends from the construction days, a woman who had been Mama's closest friend since 1984, who had driven from Lagos the night before and was sitting in the 3rd row with her hands folded. Uncle Rotimi entered with his wife and his lawyer, well dressed as always. He did not look at our side of the room. The judge was thorough and unhurried. He read every document, listened to Mr. Gbadebo, listened to Mrs. Osagi, examined the deed of gift alongside the death certificate, alongside the timestamp, with the careful attention of a man who knows that precision is the whole point of his role. Then he looked up. This court finds the defendant guilty on all 3 counts. The deed of gift filed on the date in question is declared void and of no legal effect. Title to both Oluyole properties remains with the estate of Chief Adebalil Oluwafemi Koka and shall pass according to his registered will. The defendant is sentenced to 18 months imprisonment. Full legal costs are awarded to the complainant family. He closed his file. 2 officers came and stood beside Uncle Rotimi. He turned and looked at us. Standing between those 2 officers with nowhere left to go, he looked at his brother's family, and I watched his face carefully because I wanted to understand what was there. I found nothing. The face of a man who has run out of calculations and has nothing left to arrange his expression around. They led him out. Mama did not watch him go. She was looking at the small photograph of Papa she had carried in her handbag every day since his death. His 70th birthday, Agbada, laughing at something Damilola had said. She looked at it for a long moment, then placed it carefully back in her bag and folded her hands in her lap. Outside, I stood in the February sun and thought about a man spending his brother's final living minutes in a government office, paying a clerk, watching a stamp come down, driving back, arranging his face into grief. All for 2 plots of land he was never going to get. Papa knew. That is what I return to even now. He had been sick and weakening, and he had watched Rotimi suckling, and he had said nothing to anyone and done everything necessary. Walked to Mr. Gbadebo on a Tuesday morning and made the record unambiguous, and gone home and lived the rest of his days without mentioning it once. He built his wall the same way he built everything else, quietly, precisely, every measurement correct. His brother came with a forged signature and a paid clerk and 40 minutes of calculation and thought that was enough to take what a man spent 50 years constructing. It was not enough. It was never going to be enough. That evening, we gathered at the house in Bodija. Old friends, neighbors, people who had known Papa since there was nothing yet worth protecting. At some point, I found myself alone in the compound under the mango tree he had planted in 1988. Drink going warm in my hand, looking up at the house. Every wall, every window, every tile he chose himself, still standing, still ours. He built it to last. It lasted. If this story moved you, please subscribe so you never miss the next one. Drop your city and the time in the comments. I want to see how far this reaches. 2 more stories are waiting on your screen right now. Click one and let us keep this time together. Much love.